Welcome, welcome. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Today's webinar is what AI means for your security strategy in 2026. I welcome our presenters today, Robert Praul, Director of Security at DivergeIT, and Andrew Scott, Field CISO at Todyl. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate having me.
Well, thank you, Isabel. Thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. I look forward to the content you have to present. Ultimately, what I wanted to do is set the stage and make sure that we are kind of understanding what the real threats that are presenting businesses as it relates to AI. People are becoming much more aware of security issues, and unfortunately, the landscape is changing faster than I think we're able to help everybody keep up. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about how AI is accelerating some of the threats that you may be traditionally aware of, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to mitigate that. So let's dive in. Everybody ready? All right. So AI attacks, they don't look like your traditional attacks. And why is that? But ultimately, the big difference is that where most historical static attacks looked like email that your people could easily be trained to look for misspellings or things that were easily identifiable, right? So an attack was much more like I throw this one rock over the wall and I can identify it and I can stop it. But now it's become something completely different. So if you notice here, they mimic trusted people. So the ability for an attacker now to get video or audio of someone's voice and be able to spoof a CEO is dramatically changed. So this very video, when we post this online, if someone got 30 seconds of me talking, they'd very easily be able to create a fake voice and pretend to be me and use that to spoof and do audio-based attacks via phone, etc. The second is with AI and with the agents, now you've reduced the barrier of collecting information to make these attacks in context a lot easier. So they're going to know, hey, your business just achieved XYZ goal because you published it on your LinkedIn, or you announced a partnership with a new company. And all of these things are open doors. These are information that can be gleaned easily that used to take a human a lot of time to pull together. Right? Third, ultimately, they're adapting faster than any manual security review process can keep up with. So as soon as these vulnerabilities are detected and announced, like they're immediately trying to operationalize those and come after you with them. So faster than you can prevent it. Then the last, they bypass your traditional awareness. We kind of touched on this. Like, no longer can we rely on teaching your people to just look for spelling mistakes or odd little quirks of the email as an indication of it not being legitimate. So those are the four key differences of how AI is changing the way these attacks look. So there are 5 different vectors that we should just get on the table so you understand where these could be coming in. So the first is identity and impersonation. Kind of touched on that. How do we create that belief or urgency because we believe it's someone important contacting us? Second is through that business communication, like those wire fraud attempts, those phishing attacks, anything like that, that's through business email communication. The big next one, though, is shadow AI exposure. So this is what AI tools are your people using that you may not be aware of? And how would those tools then be subject to create risk for you? Whether it be a prompt injection attack or just overexposure of your data or sharing data unsecurely with somebody who now has it to train their models and it can be found in their systems and you have no idea what your employees are sharing. Over permission access. So very oftentimes there's not a robust regular review of the permissions people have, and that can lead to much easier access to data via the AI awareness than it had previously. And then last is no visibility into that AI usage. So how do you know Susie is using Claude or ChatGPT or any other risky AI tool that you may not be aware of? Are these tools sanctioned? You should know that the answer to that question. What ones have I allowed in my environment? So what does this all mean? So these are great, but let's put it in context, okay? The big one is just remember this number, $2.9 billion in losses associated with wire fraud attacks this year. 2.9 billion. Well, it's more than the economies of some countries, right? So this is big business. Don't have any illusion this is just like kids in a back room or lone wolf, hacker guys. That this is full-on corporation like level business organization and tools for people to execute these attacks, and it's just getting more and more advanced. Once you've had an attack, like you have to consider, what do I have any compliance elements that could be triggered here that I have to live up to, whether it's SOC 2, I'm violating my HIPAA, or there's some GDPR obligation that I have to comply with. All of these become important when you experience a breach. And ultimately, it makes it so much easier to target the weakest links, the people that you may traditionally not think of as, even if they were breached, as being a big threat to the company. But in this case, it's a big deal because now all of a sudden they're able to pretend to be that person. They're able to go to HR and say, hey, HR, I need to have my direct deposit updated. And you would not know that this is now something that's being driven by AI and the AI agent. Right? These deep fakes, these are also big things to be really concerned about. And just imagine the brand damage that can occur if they deep fake you onto a YouTube video, and there's really not a lot you can do to get it down other than post a issue with YouTube, right? So it becomes very difficult to prevent some of these brand damaging attacks. And then the last is really the AI accelerated ransomware. Like the standard protections are great, but these ransomwares are better or much better at achieving the goal of trying to encrypt your stuff and perform these kind of ransom attacks, right? So all of these is how AI is being weaponized. And so there's no one switch you can flip and say, I'm now protected. It's really a concert of things that you have to approach to be able to mitigate this risk. Okay, so real high level, how should you go about approaching securing your organization? One is nobody loves to talk about policies, but it starts with deciding what your policies and governance are. Second is making sure that you have identity verification going on. So if a wire transfer is account information being changed, you should have a standard process that's outside of your electronic communications to be able to verify these things and prevent those attacks. Monitoring for access and behavioral anomalies. These are things like managed detection and response, security operations center, being able to look and if people are trying to log in, is this risky? Is this trusted? Like, are there elements that I should be aware of and be able to take action immediately? And then last is really strengthening that human component. Continuing to, it's great. We've all decided that once a year training is enough, but it's not. We need to start doing those monthly simulations. We need to be testing the people, making sure they know these new kinds of attacks exist. Keeping them up to date is incredibly important. They're your front line of defense. And the last is ultimately the goal is we need to be able to use AI. Like this is an unparalleled change in the business opportunity out here. Like things will change dramatically, and it's all because we're empowering our people with these tools, but you really have to think about doing that safely. So with that, I'd like to really introduce Andrew Scott today. So appreciative of him joining us. He comes from Todyl. Todyl is our partner on security. So they provide our EDR, our managed detection and response, our MXDR. So their team is constantly watching for these risky sign-ins, for these signs, behavioral signs of compromise on the computers. They're our partner in protecting you. So we really appreciate them joining and to give us a little bit more insight in the kinds of things that they're seeing out there in the marketplace. So with that, Andrew, thank you again. Take it away.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thank you, Robert. And thank you for having me. So yeah, you did a great, kind of, summary, I think, and starting point already. This is, that was really good. So as you said, let's get a little deeper. So I think it's important to really understand, you mentioned it's not just, kind of hackers in hoodies or a teenager in a back room, although I'll say it could be, but cybercrime is big business, right? And AI, just as we're all looking for the, efficiencies and, kind of opportunities to gain time back, adversaries and threat actors and cyber criminals are all doing the same, right? So some of those things you talked about, and it's really at every stage of how cyber criminals will attack an organization. What this has done is really lower the barrier to entry to almost anybody on the dark web. Cyber criminal marketplaces can buy these pre-made kits, these pre-made tools, and be able to use AI to conduct attacks at a scale and speed. And I think it's important to make that two distinction, both the amount of volume they can target at once and the speed at which the attacks will happen, at a rate that, as you noted, defenders, we haven't seen this, before. This has been building over time. But a key way that they're doing this is what's called vibe hacking, right? And really what that is using AI tools. So for example, Claude Code, many legitimate uses for it, right? For defenders, for organizations, et cetera. They are also using it to automate the reconnaissance, meaning, really looking at your organization from the attacker's perspective. What are all the accounts, the systems, the people, the business partners, everything about your organization? What are all the entry points? And it's going to do that in an automated way across potentially dozens or hundreds, right? Of organizations, and then be able to extract and grab all the usernames and passwords and MFA tokens and all the different angles it's going to be able to get in, and then be able to penetrate a network. So an example of this, hit the news the other day. A very low capability, fairly, junior, I guess you could say, Russian cyber criminal was identified by AWS Threat Intelligence in actually compromising over 600 different Fortinet firewalls and organizations using AI alone by themselves. Just one or two people, probably at most, conducting this. And every time they would hit an organization that was a little bit difficult, they just automatically pivot to another softer target, let's say. So really, this is what is highlighted is no one is too small to be targeted, but also you want to make it a lot harder to attack you, to make a successful breach, right? To really kind of go after what matters most to you than the business next door to you, because that's the scale now, right? It is really, we have to all be leveling up that much because of the speed and volume and capability now. And so that AI is really being used through what we call the kill chain. This is the stages by which a cyber attack will occur. Okay. And so really they'll do reconnaissance, they'll find their way in, then they're going to find that foothold where they're going to start to hide, and then find, other areas of your environment or data that's really valuable. They're going to steal that and then be able to maybe deploy ransomware or other things to be able to shut down operations that cause pressure and pain for your organization to pay. Right. So really AI is enabling them in near real time. So their attacks are actually learning once they get in the environment. It is also adapting to learning about your environment, free hosting, how it's able to deploy and evade, even calculating data of, for instance, Anthropic, the makers of Claude, identified an attack last year where data was stolen by a threat actor from 30 different organizations. And AI actually analyzed the value of that data to the organization and created very customized, tailored extortion notes, but also dollar values that the organization could afford, but was painful enough that it would make them pay. So it's actually doing business analysis, as you might do yourself, on what the value of your organization is in real time. It's just an example as we are trying to use these, think about how using AI as your own organization. Adversaries are doing all the same thing, whether it's creating new content, new phishing links, new websites, making things be very believable, increasing their reach, and so forth. Okay. But it's not just how they're using AI to attack, it's also about attacking the AI tools themselves. Right. So as Robert, you mentioned people maybe putting information into AI tools like ChatGPT or other LLMs that maybe they shouldn't be. Adversaries are constantly trying to work around the safeguards and kind of barriers that the AI tools have built in. So it's a real game of cat and mouse. But for example, LLM prompt injections. What this is really trying to outsmart and through the queries and prompting of an AI tool, be able to divulge information that other organizations have put into it. So it's being able to sort of trick it, social engineer the AI into giving you what you want, or to break AI's barriers where these are inherently built to say, don't allow it to be used for malicious use. But we've seen where you can use examples of like, I'm a student doing research, and it starts to think, oh, well, you'd be doing this for a course. Let me do this. And so it starts to divulge, things are being able to achieve certain functions. So it's a little cat and mouse, but I think the important part that I want everyone to take away from this is that it is being used to create such a speed and scale of attacks that it's really everyone now has to really take a hard look at. It's not a chance if you're going to be attacked. It's when, and honestly, how often, because you could be hit multiple times if different groups are just trying to automate this or based upon how you even browse the internet and getting hit. And so that's really kind of what can you not afford to lose, or business interruption can you not afford to have. So as we look at the next slide, some of the societal impact of AI adoption, a lot of organizations are using them. 78% of organizations use AI. More and more are saying, hey, return to office. We must have mandatory AI use as part of our jobs. I think I saw one Fortune 500 recently saying no job, like performance reviews are, do you use AI as part of your job? Show me, prove it to me, right? We want those efficiencies that this is bringing us in business, but that's also leading to a lot of the adoption that employees are under pressure to embrace AI, to get faster, to produce more, to also stay relevant as a role. Honestly, people are maybe feeling a little threatened out there in the industries. And so that's leading people to adopt AI tools that maybe have not been sanctioned, as you mentioned, Robert. So the honest question for everyone listening here, right, or watching is, do you even know where your data is going that matters to you? And are your people putting into tools that you don't know about? Or are you okay with that? And so that's where there's that security impact, those, kind of 56% increase in those harmful AI incidents, right? Where that could either be, hey, maybe AI is being used against us, but also where, oops, I'm sending out too much. I put, entered our client list in there because I was just trying to analyze it. That's not good, right? We don't want that information out. And so as people regularly use AI, but also that those jobs are exposed to it, it's the security impact of what this means, both from a threat actor or cyber criminal group, but also your own people. And that's a really important thing, that it is introducing, I think, increased insider risk to organizations of using AI. And I think the other key component you mentioned there, Robert, about phishing emails using AI, they're getting more and more and more believable. Okay. So if a phishing email is even more believable, and phishing emails are constantly now bypassing regular controls, if your users are failing phishing tests, that could lead to stolen credentials. And then what do they have access to? We need that training, but can we also wait? We need to couple that with other security measures. We need security monitoring. We need identity security components, because we should almost in some ways assume that my credentials are going to get phished, because can our people keep up with the training if we're only doing it once a year, to your point? That's really important to understand the security impact and the speed and scale, and how much are we really, kind of enabling our people, our teams, our employees, our workforce to be as productive and focused as possible, but to do it within the right balance and guides. Okay. So looking a little bit at one of those phishing automation platforms, so Spam GPT is an example of this. And these are, I guess what, one of the terms of these things are dark LLMs as an example, but, really, think Chat GPT for malicious purposes kind of concepts. This is for building very large scale, highly believable phishing emails. So if you've ever used ChatGPT to summarize all these notes and create an outreach or an intro email for me that looks really sounds like me, you can be great at that. You're really good at that. It could also be used for creating phishing emails in the same vein. And so an actor can just simply enter this in, as we see, and then cast this out very widely, and it's a highly believable email, right, in most cases. And then, so what is the implications of that? If someone clicks this, if someone downloads something, if someone puts information in here, what does that mean? Are we okay with that? Can we battle against this reality now? So this is important, that phishing is, always kind of the human is either the weakest link or the first line of defense, depending on your perspective. But this is really now, do we have to start to assume breach and really kind of protect organizations and users from themselves, knowing that this is there, while still also training and enabling our workforces? right? If we look at kind of how attacks are going over time as well throughout, kind of mentioned AI being part of the kill chain, the ability for AI to create malware. That's, malicious code, kind of, various different, pieces of software that allow a adversary access or to do certain things in an environment or steal some data. It will actually modify and adapt and tailor its attack or evade detection in real time. So it's actually adapting to how defenders are operating. This makes it challenging, right, in general for everyone, but it also demands that we cannot just rely on the same, I've got antivirus, I've got a, decent endpoint security solution, and I got MFA and I'm good. Well, I'm glad you're doing those things, but this is basically adapting and accounting for detection, for evading that, for trying to stay hidden in real time. This is really that hard part of we need that human element, not just for training, but to monitor environments in real time to really see is something going wrong. Because AI it's really now technology versus technology, and that extra human continuous monitoring element really comes into play. That do we see these triggers that seem just slightly off? And if attacks can happen in a matter of minutes, right? I saw a recent report the other day from one of the security organizations out there in the industry that the mean time to exfiltrate data, meaning to compromise an environment, find that information, and then steal that data, was 72 minutes. The fastest was 25 minutes. It's a little longer than the lunch break to lose your information. It's significant, right? So can we really adapt to these slight changes in these advanced tactics that are now just frankly commonplace and available to anyone who wants to try to attack someone? Okay. And I don't mean to be kind of creating fear here. It's just, unfortunately, this is just what we're up against. So we sort of have to really acknowledge that. And then what do we do to get past this, right? How do we secure AI for the end users? So let's take a look at kind of the next slide of how do we really empower businesses and innovation and adoption, which is the promise that AI is giving us, while still really protecting that. So, AI is, opaque, as we're saying here. Really, there's biases and other things. But how do we understand how AI is interacting in our environments? What inputs is it presenting? How is it part of our workflows? Is it manipulating or doing other things? If I were to feed it bad data, would it be then maybe kind of coming back and giving me wrong responses? Is someone trying to poison my, right, or our use? Not our being total, our being anyone watching, right? But use of AI and the way that you're using it. It's about how is that data stored? What data do you have? What is your business function? Where is it, right? How is it stored? How's it secured? How is it used? Do we know? That's a really key element, I think, right now that I would say almost as scary as the AI use, against organizations is equally or maybe even more so is the use of internal users and losing the data that you value most because they're trying to gain those efficiencies. We can easily start to close that up by getting some visibility and some control and policy over that. And that's that shadow AI that I'm really mentioning, right? That's, if there's one takeaway, I'd have everyone go check that after this webinar of starting to look at what tools are being used in my environment, right? At the bare minimum. But I think the cost of AI, so AI is both for, right, kind of obviously we're talking about the threats, but also businesses, defenders. How is, AI-driven SOCs and secure operations centers, that being security, round-the-clock security teams and organizations like Todyl and like Diverge, right? How are we supporting you all either listening or just there in the ecosystem, right? AI is a massive enhancement that organizations are embracing to make sure we're on top of all of this for you, watching what's going on, being able to understand these nuances and get better insights more rapidly, right? So it's that double-edged sword. And then what does AI compliance look like? Well, it's understanding we have the latest models in software, right? We have approved functions, right, and software running. We're patching, hardening, kind of understanding who has access systems, vetting them properly, right? We saw that whole thing where everyone went bananas, about DeepSeek, which was the Chinese, Chat GPT. Everyone started downloading that. We realized it was tunneling all data back over to China. Suddenly that wasn't allowed, of course, for good reason. But that example of, is this okay? Are we cool with using this? Are we vetting it? Do we understand who we're doing business with or what we're using, even if it's open source or freeware, right? So, kind of taking it then to how is Todyl using AI? Well, first and foremost, I mentioned that we have, we are using this. We leverage a AI-driven, capability that we have created called Janus, and this is really giving us, kind of key summarization, hunting, insights, and hidden aspects there about the data, about the cases, the alerts, everything going on in the environment. Janus is really that force multiplier for total SOC, right? And the platform to understand across all the different data sources what is going on in the environment and how do we need to understand this, and very rapidly doing that. And that's contributing to what's called UEBA, that is user behavior analytics, right? So that's really understanding how those user deviations, Robert, you mentioned those like slight little changes, right, that seem sort of nuanced or different. How are we understanding how those changes over time, not just a user's behavior, but with devices, applications, data, everything else? Because that's really the lens we have to be looking at. And then really how, Todyl's looking at threat research and detection engineering through, adapting to new techniques, new detections, gap analysis, really doing hunts and, exploration investigations for this, as well as, frankly, maintaining and securing our own platform, right? So that we are using it from an engineering capacity and capability to make sure that, hey, it's constantly secured, constantly up, other things, right? Not a sales pitch at all, but it's really an important understanding that AI is here to enhance how users, businesses, et cetera, can improve operations, streamline everything. And so Total is really taking a serious stand in using AI to drive not only our operations, but also our partnerships and our platform and business ahead as well. So appreciate that, Robert, for letting me kind of share some of what we're seeing and some of what this means. But I'll pass it back to you and the team. Maybe we have some Q&A.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrew. I think everything you've shared is very valuable. Hopefully everybody else sees the same thing. We can't emphasize this enough. Please take away that if you don't know what AI tools are being used in your environment, that should be your first priority, is find out. And then we can absolutely help you with that. And we'll be referencing that in a few minutes. But before we do that, we've actually had some great questions in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and try to answer those. So I'm going to tackle the first one here, Andrew. I'm going to give it a whack, and then I want to see if you got anything to add to that.
Sure.
So the first one was, with AI-powered attacks becoming more conversational, like we talked about in the first slide, how does that impact their incident response and how to change that, et cetera? And I think that's a great question, because historically, I think breaches and attacks generally were very one time, meaning they got in, you closed the gap, and attack was over. But what's changed is that now, as Andrew mentioned in a couple of examples, is that the AI is able to adapt in real time. So in your mind, if you're going to visualize this, think of it like an agent, like a person who's out there and goes, oh, well, they closed that door, so let's try to change course and go over to this other door that I'm aware of. And we've seen this in the wild with our own clients, where a breach occurred and then we stopped it, and then within hours, they were attacking multiple different vectors of the client at the same time. What have you seen, Andrew?
Yeah, exactly the same. Where it's, when one door closes, another opens kind of idea, but for malicious purposes. So I would agree with you. I think this really, it's a shift in, I think, understanding. So we look at what an incident response plan or processes or playbooks are for, right? It's, that sort of idea of a traditional linear attack. But with this, I think if the attack signals, let's say, the little triggers and the alerts and things that we're seeing that seem anomalous, if it's kind of harder to find those breadcrumbs or to see it, I think it really demands that organizations evaluate or consider, maybe instead of, oh, it's got to follow the same thing from the outside, I need to now really focus on, why would I be targeted? What are my crown jewels? And really focus on sort of almost assuming breach, that zero trust shift, and saying, what is my crown jewels, data, systems, people, whatever, and how are they interacting, what's interacting there, and then building outwards. So then you can really identify what is our comfort level of when I need to detect something, or what would be an incident. could I do it, right? Because if it's multiple avenues in and it's a lot more nuanced, then really it's what are we trying to protect most, and how do I just hold on to those things as much as possible and as closely as possible, and adapt there. Because otherwise we can get caught, I think, with trying to look across every aspect of an organization, and it can be a little distracting. So I think incident response also is sort of at an inflection point with this of we need to now kind of shift gears in a way or adapt to what is the key crown jewels that we really need to monitor at its core and watch small changes there maybe, or how they get access to that. And, and then be able to, start to broaden there. And that makes it a lot more digestible. But that will change how incident response playbooks and alerting and kind of response needs. And maybe we start isolating systems, or maybe we suspend users, or we shut down access in some ways. Maybe we're not okay with certain functions being available anymore because otherwise we can't tell.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where this is almost this fundamental strategy shift that this is driving towards incident response, but how we perceive what a breach is and at what threshold we're okay with there being a breach or an incident, and how we're defining that.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Like, you've done it. I know you've done it, and I don't know how many people on this call have done it, but if you've ever been in an incident response tabletop, it's usually a single scenario. You talk through it. At the end of the scenario, it's mitigated. Rarely have I ever seen an incident response tabletop where they go, okay, now you block that account. Now that you're being attacked on this account and through this other door. And I think that is the eye opener to people.
Yeah.
Is like, I actually would say that the crown jewel concept is a little sometimes misleading for general business owners, just because they don't, the crown jewel really is you are a trusted resource to someone else.
Yep.
Someone else pays you, right? And through that revenue generation process, you being a trusted resource and then being able to pretend to be you and launch an attack as you is the crown jewel.
Yep.
Right? Not so much what they may specifically want to steal from you. And so when you take and combine those together with AI and its now ability to understand and enact these things on its own, it becomes very scary.
Yeah, and I love that, Robert. I think that AI, if anything, is going to amplify the vulnerability of, unfortunately, the supply chain of American, especially American, but also, global business, right? Where, instead of trying to hammer away at big, enterprise or large orgs with huge budgets, they're going to go down to maybe the small business that, is part of that supply chain and compromise there and work their way up. And AI is going to make that increasingly easier and easier. And unfortunately, yeah, many organizations and small businesses or mid-market businesses, right, may have lower budgets, and those are tough decisions to make. Do I invest in a new business line? Do I hire more people? Do I, get a security capability? Those are, key line items that have to be determined. But AI is unfortunately going to drive it so that it's easier to go from, kind of bottom up than maybe, at the top or there at the middle. So I love how you mentioned that supply chain thing. It's really important for people to consider that you yourself might be the target to get to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very not too far in the future where you're going to be measured in some fashion in the business ecosystem. Or if you're breached multiple times and a company receives attacks from you, you're going to not be a viable vendor for them anymore. So this is really going to hit the business community hard. And if you don't keep up and take this seriously, I think that's going to affect your ability to conduct business. Let's see. Next question is, what is the first step a mid-sized business should take if they have no visibility into which AI tools their employees are using? So, Andrew, I'm going to let you take a whack at this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say this is really where I think software can kind of come into play. There might be some things that you have for systems administration, or you can kind of find, hey, where people browsing to, maybe have a firewall that's looking at kind of, oh, I see that someone's going to ChatGPT or other things. But I think that's a good baseline, right? That, there's some network monitoring tools and things that are free, or, stuff there. I think also looking at your own, like Microsoft or Google licensing is coming with either Copilot, or Gemini or other things. And hey, is it the free version? Are we paying? Like, what are the features there? Are we cool with the free version? Many orgs may not be, but if people are using that and populating it with their own material. I think that there's another level to that, though, right? As we're seeing, at least in the security sphere, orgs of all sizes really embracing, I think, as business is now in the cloud, pretty much, full force, SaaS applications, data and crown jewels, so to speak, is everywhere. And so how do we know what's in an environment, what's interacting where? And this is where, I think the idea of these, correlation kind of, analysis platforms called a SIM, a security information event management solution that can really understand not just, okay, what's running the environment, but how are users and networks and data and systems and applications in the cloud all interacting together, and what is and is not normal. Because that, I think, is kind of a very great way of sort of ripping the Band-Aid off and seeing the big picture, and then allows you to really take those risk-based approaches of, okay, I'm not cool with what's going on over here, but I'm okay over here or on this level. And now I can start to properly really kind of turn the dial, I'll say, to be able to do that. But, I think this is where as organizations and networks and business environments are just continuing to sprawl, we really need to be at all levels of business, everyone from, small business all the way to the, Fortune 500, really having a full view of that environment and how are people interacting, because that's where AI is sort of hiding there in between the blind spots. And we need to surface those, to be honest.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And to bring it and crystallize it for some people who may not, it may be more difficult to take actions. I think fundamentally 90% of all these AI tools that you should be concerned about are on the web.
Yep.
So if you're not actively blocking AI sites until you have authorized it, not only authorized it, but you validated what the privacy policy is for it, and you know what happens to any data that's being put in there. And I love, and you probably get this too, Andrew, everybody's like, oh, well, they're just putting in emails in there, or it's, there's nothing sensitive. There is everything you need to be able to compromise your organization being put into these things without you knowing.
Yep.
So start there. Get that list, block them by default. And then there's a second layer where you can tell specifically what each of your people are using. It's a little more in depth, but I would say start somewhere. Start gaining control of your perimeter and understanding the majority of these tools are being used via the web.
Can I add one thing there as well, Robert? I think there you mentioned a real quick point earlier about training and people, and I think a key element of this, right? We talked about AI use just to drive efficiencies, or maybe people feeling exposed. I think this is both a security risk, but we can also make it an opportunity for the business. By looking, we can engage more deeply with our employees, understand how do you feel you need to be doing work to work better. How can I really align with you? So I'm not saying, no, don't do this, but I want to enable you safely. It can be a cool way to open those lines of communication of how do you prefer to work? How can I get you the resources you need to be able to move securely? That could be a cool opportunity to really create a good culture around AI use and secure there, but like to open up those lines of maybe your people need access to things that maybe you hadn't thought about. And so maybe it's not malicious, but it's simply maybe how do we go get that as well? I just think there's that important inflection point that it's not necessarily no, but it's how do we help you do this securely, to your point, and creating that culture there.
Yep. No, that's absolutely accurate. If you're not looking at this to say, hey, I can scale my business 25, 50, 100% with the same staff just by using this technology, then you're missing it. This is absolutely what's going on. It's it's like giving everybody superpowers, and I think taking the time to understand what they need to accomplish and how they can do things faster, more efficiently, and big picture, improve the quality. I mean, I think that's the underlying thing we've talked about today is the quality of the output is better than the average person can produce in much less time. So the value to the business is astronomical, and that's why I think it's so critical to get the security piece right here.